listening to the Get Passionate Show with Min and Jen. Now it's time to get passionate.
Hello, welcome to the Get Passionate Radio Show. I'm Jen.
And I'm Min.
Okay, today we're gonna get passionate about social change, and we have a special guest with us today. It's Malcolm Prowle. Malcolm is a professor, university professor at Nottingham University, and we're absolutely delighted to have Malcolm with us today on the show. Hello, Malcolm.
Hello there. Hi.
Hi. Okay, so Malcolm, we're gonna start straight away because we only have half an hour to talk about this fascinating subject of the financial crisis. And how do we get ourselves out of it? What's to come, and what can we do? So, Malcolm, my first question: where do you think this financial crisis is going?
That's a very difficult question, and I always say, if anybody tells you they know exactly where it's going, they know nothing, and they're not telling the truth.
So you're not going to tell us then?
There are so many impossibilities here. There are so many things that can throw plans off course. It's been very difficult to be precise about it. What we do know is that, following the economic recession from 2008, many economies, including the United Kingdom, went into economic recession. Recession, we don't want to get technical about it, but basically it means, standards of living are going to decline. And that is what we've seen in this country. Now, there's an issue with whose standards of living, because obviously people who've been made unemployed take a bigger hit than those who, let's say, don't have a pay rise. But, that has been happening. The problem is, of course, and this is almost perhaps unique in our history, it's not just Britain alone. This is almost like a global phenomena, or at least, the developed world phenomena. There are huge problems in the United States. Its economy has been in recession. President Obama has an election coming up, and he's very keen to try and show that the economy is getting better, but it doesn't seem to be getting better, of course. In Europe, we all know about the Eurozone crisis.
Yep.
We all know about the Greek debt situation. What we don't know is what's going to happen. If we get to the stage where Greece defaults on its debt, and, the whole financial edifice in Europe could come tumbling down. And just to give you a quote, I don't want to quote him inaccurately, but the governor of the Bank of England, Sir Living King, said some weeks ago that it could be worse than you can possibly imagine. Which is a little worrying, to say the least.
So
certainly it could be something akin, to the depression of the 1930s, something of that sort of modern magnitude.
All right. So that sounds quite depressing, Malcolm. I think my energy levels have dropped. but actually, that's why we are on this show, because we don't want those energy levels to drop so low that we just can't do anything about it. We want to get passionate about the subject so that we can actually do something about it. So why do you actually think that getting passionate is going to make any difference?
Well, it depends what you're getting passionate about, you see. I mean, we're in a country, like many countries, where our standard of living has, increased with the occasional blip here and there, but our standard of living has increased, substantially, let's say, since the Second World War, year after year, decade after decade. If we look back at what people earned in the 1940s, say, and what they earn today, even if you take account of inflation and these sorts of things, people are much, much better off. Now, we're in a situation today, to be quite honest, where people will have 2 foreign holidays, perhaps they'll go out to dinner, once a week or something like that. They will go to a leisure club, all of these things which weren't dreamed of by our parents and our grandparents. Now, the consequence of economic recession, of a financial crisis, undoubtedly means our standard of living is going to decrease. And I don't think there's any point in trying to deny that. And I think politicians do us a disservice by trying to pretend, it'll all be okay in a couple of years' time. I don't think it will be okay. Now, what that tells me is, when it comes to passion, you have to be passionate about something other than material goods. You have to be passionate about your communities, about your neighbours, about charitable organisations. All of these sorts of things are other things to be passionate about than foreign holidays and meals in nice restaurants and these sorts of things. So I think we have to sort of almost refocus our lives to be passionate about different things.
Very interesting.
I know, I find that really fascinating. Just want to ask you, Malcolm, following on from that idea about getting passionate about things that really matter, such as the financial crisis. There are some really passionate people that are taking part in the Occupy Wall Street and Occupy St Paul's, and I think it's replicated throughout the world as well. What impact do you see that having on getting other people passionate and getting them involved? And do you think it can actually make a difference to the financial crisis? And how? I know it's a very long question, but
well,
over to you.
I think these things you're talking about, Occupy Wall Street and those sorts of things, they're obviously done by some very motivated people who are prepared to, travel huge distances, camp out and these sorts of things in difficult conditions. Similarly with the St Paul people in London,
That's right.
I think it only happens when politicians begin to feel threatened about things and decide they have to do something. And I'm not sure at the moment that enough people are in agreement with or committed to what some of these protest groups are trying to achieve.
Do you think... Do you think that if more people got involved and got passionate, and maybe it would have a greater impact? And then how would that actually change? Could it change the crisis? Because from what you were saying earlier, it almost seems that it is inevitable that we have a recession after a boom. So how effective are these types of protests in changing something that maybe can it be changed or can it not be changed?
Well, I think it can be changed. I mean, I think one of the things we have to say is I think people today, not just in our country, but many countries, including the US, are very cynical about the ability of the political system to change it. If we're looking at this country now, the three main parties, there is huge disillusionment with all three of them. The trust levels of politicians are, at an all-time low. We see similar sort of problems in the United States.
That's right.
That voting in a different way is going to solve the problem. Now that sort of compares, if you went back to the start of the 20th century, a lot of people felt, and believed that the Labour Party, which was a new political party at that time, would change things. And in many ways it did, but I don't think they believe that anymore. So I think if they're going to be passionate about things, they have to be passionate more about causes. This could be climate change, or things like overseas aid, or dealing with the fact that we are. I'm not one of these climate change fanatics, I think, call it that. But we've got to face the fact there is no oil being made anywhere in the world today. So all the oil we are using is going to run out.
That's right.
Nothing will change that. Until we start getting passionate about these sorts of things, about how I can contribute to dealing with the oil crunch when it comes, dealing with all sorts of problems when they come. I think those things people have got to get passionate about. Now, there's various ways in which they can do that, and so that's the sort of thing to think about. It's just too easy to sit back and think, there's nothing I can do, or I leave it to somebody else to do it.
And do you see, for example, we've seen the massive role that social media, such as Twitter, has had in, for example, the Arab Spring, the new Arab Spring. Do you see things like social media as being effective tools that can actually help, the people, seeing as, they've lost faith in the political side of things? Do you see things like social media, helping people to deal with the financial crisis in a more practical way?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think it's a means, it's a mechanism. As you rightly point out, in some parts of the world, like the Arab world, in Iran, people have used social media to connect together with other people fighting for the same thing.
That's right.
And I always say about social media as well, if you look at the number of big companies who are using social media for marketing purposes, there must be something in it. They wouldn't be doing it otherwise. I think the problem with it is, as I say, it's a tool, a mechanism. In somewhere like the Arab Spring, we know they're using that mechanism to connect together for the same sort of cause. I'm not really sure people today are clear about what they would be connecting with. If that makes sense. What particular issues are they going to be connecting with?
Well, in terms of financial crisis, that's what I was thinking, that maybe, that people could actually help each other along in terms of, or even things like entrepreneurs creating jobs and, creating the change within themselves. And maybe, not if they don't believe in the political aspect, maybe, getting passionate amongst themselves in creating the financial, a new boom, shall we say.
Yeah, that's right, absolutely right. And I think, I don't want to be Prof in saying this, but I mean, there does seem to be, for example, take the rich, take the billionaires. In America, we've seen a number of examples where people like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett are getting involved in various sorts of causes to try and eliminate poverty, create jobs, these sorts of things. I'm not sure we're getting the same sort of response in the United Kingdom.
That's right. I think that's something that we need.
Billionaires are getting involved with.
It certainly is something to think about. Certainly, I'd love to have the listeners get involved, and maybe we can change things through ourselves and through the radio show, and just get more people involved and take part effectively to participate.
Yes, that's right. But I think the key to it is people having causes that they are passionate about. And, I'm not sure, to be honest, how many people have passion causes of any sort.
Well, I think people are passionate in terms of the financial crisis when it affects them directly. I think then they will be getting passionate. For example, if they find that they won't have any oil to use their cars, I think they will suddenly start getting very passionate indeed. I think it is a question of people participating in their life and taking a more active part in their life.
We often quote here the example, of Easter Island, the island in the Pacific, where many centuries ago all the trees were cut down. Now once that act took place, that meant the end for the island because there were no longer any timber or housing. There were no longer any possibility of building boats. And the question we always ask is, what the man who chopped down the last tree, what was he thinking about?
Exactly.
It's a little bit like that here, as I say, isn't it obvious a 2-year-old can understand that oil will run out eventually.
That's right. And
are we getting passionate about? All we're worried about is the price of oil going up. And, will we be able to get a new car, all that sort of thing? We're not thinking about our children, our grandchildren will have to live in a world without oil.
That's true.
I know a lot of people are getting passionate about sustainability, and which is why, the green movement has been so huge as well.
Yeah.
Okay. But, Michael, just to come back to what you're saying then, we have become very short-sighted. Yeah. And, not being able to see a bit further than our nose. So that's why probably the last tree went down. You just couldn't see after what would happen. You just went to the tree at that point, right?
Yeah.
So it looks like that we need to sort of come back to the basics of what it means to be a human being, right? Absolutely. Like coming back to what you were saying earlier about we want to have a nice car, we want to have a nice standard of living, and this is going to change, and we're sort of kind of so used to that, and we sort of lost so many values, the values of community that you were talking about. Now, how do we go back to that basis, and what do you see in terms of the social change that we want to implement? What other paradigm do you think we could implement? What do you suggest?
Right, let me just add one thing on that, first of all. You said, I meant to comment about politicians, and, politicians being on a low level of trust and being sort of despised by the population. You see, I could say in many ways you get the politicians you deserve. If the electorate of individuals we have a short-term view, as you said, but don't be surprised if the politicians take a short-term view as well.
Yeah.
They are sort of reflecting what we think.
That's true.
Well, they only come here for a term. They only think about their term, don't they? And if you look at it, half of the term they have to be in the office. The other half they have to think about, okay, what I'm going to do next. So a politician really has little realistic power when the power really is within the people.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. But to go back to your question, I mean, I think we have to start reflecting on, as you put it, the nature of humanity. We are human. We are only on this earth for 70, 80, 90 years, whatever it is. Nobody's going to live forever. Nobody's going to live for 200 years. And we've got to start reflecting on why we are here, what we do with our time here, what we leave as our legacy. these sorts of things, not as if they're worrying about, whether we have 2 foreign holidays or 3 foreign holidays this year. I don't think enough people do that. And you mentioned about communities, Jen, and, it's quite common today now to hear people say, if for example, the Scouts need some volunteer help or a charity needs some volunteer help, it's quite common for people to say, oh, yeah, I'd love to help, I'm far too busy. And you have to ask, why are they busy? And I might misquote the statistics here, but I remember somebody telling me once that, in the last 10 years or so, our use of the internet has gone up an hour a day.
So doing what? I think that's the question.
That's why people are so, I always have to, when people say they are busy, the question is, well, what are they doing to be so busy?
Exactly.
I think it's
so,
just,
the reason they're so busy is they're spending more time on the internet.
So, Malcolm, I just wanted to ask you, being an author myself, I understand you've written a book. Just really want to ask you how it came about and how you're intending on getting a lot of people to read it as well.
Yeah.
What are your views?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you start that. I've written several books, and I think these books came about in different ways. That's why I mentioned it. One actually came about through discussions with my students.
Right.
And out of that came an idea for a book which I then developed. The latest one I've done really is, I have to think in life, you only ever meet perhaps 2, perhaps 3 people where you have very much a meeting of minds with on things. And this has happened a couple of times. It ended up as a book. So the latest book I've co-authored with somebody who I met, and with various discussions. And interestingly, it all started about 2 years ago, 2.5 years, no, 2 years ago, it must be now, with me sending him an email and saying, Roger, you might want to reflect on these things over your Christmas dinner. And, things went on from there. We found we saw things in a very similar way. We saw the problems we thought we were creating in our society.
Right.
And that collaboration led to a book.
And the title of the book?
I have to be careful here because I always get it wrong. So I did bring it in front of me. It's called Public Services and Financial Austerity.
Right.
And it's got a subtitle. The publisher doesn't want a subtitle, but we insisted on it. It's called Getting Out of the Hole.
Okay.
The reason for this is that in the book, in the foreword, there's a quotation from the former Labour politician Dennis Healy, who said, when you're in a hole, stop digging.
Right.
That would help.
We think we're in a hole and we're still digging.
And very, very quickly, I know people need to buy your book and find out how to get out of the hole, but could you very quickly tease our listeners with a few solutions? Yes.
Okay. Let me just say one thing about the book, because I can't go into any depth. I think there's one thing we have to mention, is that whatever the problems we have at the moment because of the financial and economic crisis, they are dwarfed by another factor.
Okay.
And the other factor is the impact of the aging population.
Right.
In most countries, particularly in ours, our population is getting older.
Right.
We know that older people need more health care, more social care, all of these sorts of things. And statistics have been shown that the costs of aging society and governments will vastly outweigh the cost of the recent financial crisis.
Right.
Okay, now that is a sort of time bomb ticking away underneath us. Now I think the other thing we have to say is, as I say, politicians will say to you, in 2 or 3 years we'll be back to normal. Now, it could be that where we are now with this sort of low level of economic growth or nil economic growth is the normal. We may be stuck at that level.
Right.
So we have increasing demand for services in an environment where there are no extra resources. Now, the solution, we believe, is we have to get away from this idea of people in Whitehall, civil servants and ministers, making decisions that will affect people in Bradford or Birmingham or Bristol or whatever it happens to be. And we have to think in terms of decisions being made at the local and the community level about what public services are needed, how should they be provided, those sorts of things. Now, to make that effective, we come back to the link earlier, to have community decision making,
Right.
they'll have communities.
Right, that's right. So you see the solution as being building communities and building stronger communities.
Building stronger communities and empowering those communities to make decisions. I mean, former Foreign Secretary Robin Cook said that Britain is the most centralised country in Europe, and another German economist said we are the second most centralised country in the developed world.
Right.
And we have the centralisation of power in London, and we need to devolve it down to communities, and that's what means developing effective communities.
Right.
Okay.
So do you see, for example, things having councils again? Because I know they tried to disband a lot of councils, and maybe that could be an aspect of community.
It could be, but even that, a lot of our councils are quite large, and one of the problems about empowerment is people often want things empowered to them, but they don't want to empower to other people.
Right.
So, we want government to empower local councils, local authorities. They have to think in terms of empowering communities within their area as well.
Okay.
The empowerment doesn't stop at one level.
Okay, so how do you see this sort of new paradigm at community level? I mean, what does it really look like?
What does it really look like? Well, I think I have seen similar sort of models in India, actually, where they have community organizations, if you like, at the village level. And those villages have structures, they have a committee, or whatever you want to call it, or a council with a chair, and they are empowered, and they have certain resources, certain money to enable to make decisions about what actually goes on in that village. They don't need, instructions from Whitehall about doing that.
Right.
And then, that's at the lowest level, and you go up to another level where there might be a group of villages, and then there might be another sort of arrangement whereby another group will make decisions for that group of villages. But the key point is, you're devolving power and decision making to the lowest level possible.
Okay. The lowest level possible is the individual level, don't you think?
Yeah, well, it could be, but the problem with that is, if everybody makes a decision on their own, we're getting a bit of that now, of course. For example, if I give an example in the National Health Service, we have several years now, we had a policy called Patient's Choice.
Okay.
Whereby if you're ill and you if you need an operation, you have to go to hospital, you can choose which hospital you go to. Now, that is often criticised as a step too far because, of course, the only people who can really make those choices are the people who have the money to own a motor car.
Right.
It's very difficult to choose, between hospitals if you rely on public transport. So arguably that is going down to the individuals going too far, and that is discouraging community, not encouraging it. It's what we're trying to do.
Okay. There's a balance to be struck, right?
Yeah.
So, but let's go back to the developing countries, like you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Where there are definitely very good examples there in the way life is led in developing countries and in the West, in values and all these sort of things. But what do you think are the implications? Because when we talk about social change, we're talking about social change on a sort of community level, but we're also talking about, in terms of the world, because the financial crisis is, there are implications for every single country. It sort of trickles down to the community level. So developing countries, how do you think they are being impacted as well in what we are doing here in the West? And what can we change to sort of maybe cooperate better, to sort of have a different paradigm for the whole planet?
Yeah. Okay, let's make a number of comments there. I think, something I said just now about India, on the positive point, is there are certainly things we can learn from the developing countries about, empowerment models and devolving decision making and that sort of thing. I think that the problem is, of course, that, if we think financial austerity is hitting us in the West, imagine what it's going to do for those developing countries.
Exactly.
Because, we will not have the money to buy the goods which come from them, and that will affect their local economies. Now, I'm one of these things is a little bit open-minded about how effective overseas aid actually is, but I mean, I think we have to accept, up until now, our government has certainly protected the aid budget from the cuts in public spending. Whether that can continue in the longer term remains to be seen. I think it's one that they won't come under pressure on aid. But I think the most important thing we can do is, for developing countries, is open up some of their markets. We can purchase their goods. You know, we have so much protectionism around food, where we are sort of forced to buy goods made in Europe, foodstuffs. We need to access markets in developing countries so that they can, you know, benefit from us purchasing things from them. Now, that's quite difficult to convince people, you know, in a time when we're cutting back, that we have to take action which will perhaps make us worse in the short term, but will certainly help the developing countries.
Right. So is there a clash here then? Because if we want to go back to the community level, and at the same time we want to sort of, you know, have a proper free trade, or whatever that term means nowadays, and sort of, you know, really have a trade where the developing countries are not being penalized, or how do you think that could actually work?
Well, I think we have to, when we say the community level, I think we have to be a little bit careful and clarify here. Nobody is talking about devolving, let's say, defence to the level of the community.
Right.
You know, we're not going to have villages with their own little armies or towns or stuff. Those type of things like defence are obviously going to stay at the national level. What we're talking about with communities is devolving power to them for services which, you know, impact on them on a day-to-day basis. Education, health, street cleaning, libraries, leisure centres, these sorts of things. There will obviously still have to be decisions on things like overseas aid, defence, foreign affairs made at the national level. So obviously government making those sort of decisions. Okay,
that's a very important clarification, Michael. Thank you for that.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so I guess the last question, because we're getting to the end of the show, especially for our listeners who are probably now a bit more, clued up into what is going on and what we can do about it. As individuals, what do you think we can do about all this?
As individuals, I think we have to think what we believe is important in life. And I hope that thinking process would get us beyond where's the next foreign holiday coming from, what things we think are important in life, and particularly what things are important to our children and our children's children. Because we are in danger today of making decisions, or perhaps not making decisions, which will help us, but it will be our children and our children's children who have to pick up the cost of this, basically. So I think we have to think about our children as well. We have to think what's important in life, think about our children, and take some sort of actions to, be passionate about these things.
Great. Thank you very much. Professor Malcolm Prowle was on the show today with us on the Get Passionate radio show. Thank you very much, Malcolm. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, our listeners. Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, guys. So this is the end of the show for today. We are talking next week to Adam Gilliland.
Great.
Yeah. Adam is going to talk to us about the Tigers movement, which is another movement about social change. We're going to have another wonderful talk about how to change this society and this world that we're living in for to live in a better world. So join us next week, and remember to get on the website getpassionateradio.com.
You're listening to the Get Passionate Show with Min and Jen. Now it's time to get passionate.